Chapter 47. The trip home did bring another week with Mrs. Gerald, for after mature consideration she had decided to venture to America for a while. Chicago and Cincinnati were her destinations, and she hoped to see more of Lester. Her presence was a good deal of a surprise to Jennie, and it started her thinking again. She could see what the point was. If she were out of the way, Mrs. Gerald would marry Lester. That was certain. As it was, well, the question was a complicated one. Letty was Lester's natural mate, so far as birth, breeding, and position went. And yet Jennie felt instinctively that on the large human side, Lester preferred her. Perhaps time would solve the problem. In the meantime, the little party of three continued to remain excellent friends. When they reached Chicago, Mrs. Gerald went her way, and Jennie and Lester took up the customary thread of their existence. On his return from Europe, Lester set to work in earnest to find a business opening. None of the big companies made him any overtures, principally because he was considered a strong man who was looking for a control in anything he touched. The nature of his altered fortunes had not been made public. All the little companies that he investigated were having a hand-to-mouth existence, or manufacturing a product which was not satisfactory to him. He did find one company in a small town in northern Indiana which looked as though it might have a future. It was controlled by a practical builder of wagons and carriages, such as Lester's father had been in his day, who, however, was not a good businessman. He was making some small money on an investment of $15,000 and a plant worth, say, $25,000. Lester felt that something could be done here if proper methods were pursued and business acumen exercised. It would be slow work. There would never be a great fortune in it, not in his lifetime. He was thinking of making an offer to the small manufacturer when the first rumors of a carriage trust reached him. Robert had gone ahead rapidly with his scheme for reorganizing the carriage trade. He showed his competitors how much greater profits could be made through consolidation than through a mutually destructive rivalry. So convincing were his arguments that one by one, the big carriage manufacturing companies fell into line. Within a few months, the deal had been pushed through, and Robert found himself president of the United Carriage and Wagon Manufacturers Association, with a capital stock of $10 million. And with assets aggregating nearly 3/4 of that sum at a forced sale. He was a happy man. While all this was going forward, Lester was completely in the dark. His trip to Europe prevented him from seeing 3 or 4 minor notices in the newspapers of some of the efforts that were being made to unite the various carriage and wagon manufacturers. He returned to Chicago to learn that Jefferson Midgley, Imogene's husband, was still in full charge of the branch and living in Evanston. But because of his quarrel with his family, he was in no position to get the news direct. Accident brought it fast enough, however, and that rather irritatingly. The individual who conveyed this information was none other than Mr. Henry Bracebridge of Cleveland, into whom he ran at the Union Club one evening after he had been in the city a month. "I hear you're out of the old company," Bracebridge remarked, smiling blandly. "Yes," said Lester, "I'm out." "What are you up to now?" "Oh, I have a deal of my own under consideration. I'm thinking something of handling an independent concern." "Surely you won't run counter to your brother. He has a pretty good thing in that combination of his." "Combination? I hadn't heard of it," said Lester. "I just got back from Europe." Well, you want to wake up, Lester," replied Bracebridge. "He's got the biggest thing in your line. I thought you knew all about it. That the Lyman Winthrop Company, the Myers-Brooks Company, the Woods Company. In fact, 5 or 6 of the big companies are all in. Your brother was elected president of the new concern. I dare say he cleaned up a couple of millions out of the deal." Lester stared. His glance hardened a little. "Well, that's fine for Robert. I'm glad of it. Bracebridge could see that he had given him a vital stab. "Well, so long, old man," he exclaimed. "When you're in Cleveland, look us up. You know how fond my wife is of you." "I know," replied Lester. "Bye-bye." He strolled away to the smoking room, but the news took all the zest out of his private venture. Where would he be with his shabby little wagon company and his brother president of a carriage trust? Good heavens! Robert could put him out of business in a year. Why, he himself had dreamed of such a combination as this. Now his brother had done it. It's one thing to have youth, courage, and a fighting spirit to meet the blows with which fortune often afflicts the talented. It is quite another to see middle age coming on, your principal fortune possibly gone, and avenue after avenue of opportunity being sealed to you on various sides. Jennie's obvious social insufficiency, the quality of newspaper reputation which had now become attached to her, his father's opposition and death, the loss of his fortune, the loss of his connection with the company, his brother's attitude, this trust, all combined in a way to dishearten and discourage him. He tried to keep a brave face, and he had succeeded thus far, he thought, admirably. But this last blow appeared for the time being a little too much. He went home, the same evening that he heard the news, sorely disheartened. Jennie saw it. She realized it, as a matter of fact, all during the evening that he was away. She felt blue and despondent herself. When he came home, she saw what it was. Something had happened to him. Her first impulse was to say, "What is the matter, Lester?" But her next and sounder one was to ignore it until he was ready to speak, if ever. She tried not to let him see that she saw, coming as near as she might affectionately without disturbing him. "Vesta is so delighted with herself today," she volunteered by way of diversion. "She got such nice marks in school." "That's good," he replied solemnly. "And she dances beautifully these days. She showed me some of her new dances tonight. You haven't any idea how sweet she looks." "I'm glad of it," he grumbled. "I always wanted her to be perfect in that. It's time she was going into some good girls' school, I think. And Papa gets in such a rage. I have to laugh. She teases him about it, a little imp. She offered to teach him to dance tonight. If he didn't love her so, he'd box her ears." "I can see that," said Lester, smiling. "Him dancing. That's pretty good." "She's not the least bit disturbed by his storming either." "Good for her," said Lester. He was very fond of Vesta, who was now quite a girl. So Jennie tripped on until his mood was modified a little, and then some inkling of what had happened came out. It was when they were retiring for the night. "Robert's formulated a pretty big thing in a financial way since we've been away," he volunteered. "What is it?" asked Jennie, all ears. "Oh, he's gotten up a carriage trust. It's something which will take in every manufactory of any importance in the country. Bracebridge was telling me that Robert was made president and that they have nearly 8 millions in capital." "You don't say," replied Jennie. "Well, then you won't want to do much with your new company, will you?" "No. There's nothing in that just now," he said. "Later on, I fancy it may be all right. I'll wait and see how this thing comes out. You never can tell what a trust like that will do." Jennie was intensely sorry. She had never heard Lester complain before. It was a new note. She wished sincerely that she might do something to comfort him, but she knew that her efforts were useless. "Oh, well," she said, "there's so many interesting things in this world. If I were you, I wouldn't be in a hurry to do anything, Lester. You have so much time." She didn't trust herself to say anything more, and he felt that it was useless to worry. Why should he? After all, he had an ample income that was absolutely secure for 2 years yet. He could have more if he wanted it. Only his brother was moving so dazzlingly onward while he was standing still. Perhaps drifting would be the better word. It did seem a pity. Worst of all, he was beginning to feel a little uncertain of himself. Chapter 48. Lester had been doing some pretty hard thinking, but so far he had been unable to formulate any feasible plan for his reentrance into active life. The successful organization of Robert's Carriage Trade Trust had knocked in the head any further thought on his part of taking an interest in the small Indiana wagon manufactory. He could not be expected to sink his sense of pride in place and enter a petty campaign for business success with a man who was so obviously his financial superior. He had looked up the details of the combination, and he found that Bracebridge had barely indicated how wonderfully complete it was. There were millions in the combine. It would have every little manufacturer by the throat. Should he begin now in a small way and pike along in the shadow of his giant brother? He couldn't see it. It was too ignominious. He would be running around the country trying to fight a new trust with his own brother as his tolerant rival and his own rightful capital arrayed against him. It couldn't be done. Better sit still for the time being. Something else might show up. If not, well, he had his independent income and the right to come back into the cane company if he wished. Did he wish? The question was always with him. It was while Lester was in this mood, drifting, that he received a visit from Samuel E. Ross, a real estate dealer, whose great wooden signs might be seen everywhere on the windy stretches of prairie about the city. Lester had seen Ross once or twice at the Union Club, where he had been pointed out as a daring and successful real estate speculator, and he had noticed his rather conspicuous offices at LaSalle and Washington Streets. Ross was a magnetic-looking person of about 50 years of age, tall, black-bearded, black-eyed, an arched, wide-nostrilled nose and hair that curled naturally, almost electrically. Lester was impressed with his lithe, cat-like figure and his long, thin, impressive white hands. Mr. Ross had a real estate proposition to lay before Mr. Kane. Of course, Mr. Kane knew who he was. And Mr. Ross admitted fully that he knew all about Mr. Kane. Recently, in conjunction with Mr. Norman Yale of the wholesome grocery firm of Yale, Simpson, and Rice, he had developed Yalewood. Mr. Kane knew of that? Yes, Mr. Kane knew of that. Only within 6 weeks, the last lots in the Ridgewood section of Yalewood had been closed out at a total profit of 42%. He went over a list of other deals in real estate which he had put through, all well-known properties. He admitted frankly that there were failures in the business. He had had one or two himself. But the successes far outnumbered the bad speculations, as everyone knew. Now Lester was no longer connected with the Kane Company. He was probably looking for a good investment, and Mr. Ross had a proposition to lay before him. Lester consented to listen, and Mr. Ross blinked his cat-like eyes and started in. The idea was that he and Lester should enter into a one-deal partnership covering the purchase and development of a 40-acre tract of land lying between 55th, 71st, Halsted Streets, and Ashland Avenue on the southwest side. There were indications of a genuine real estate boom there, healthy, natural, and permanent. The city was about to pave 55th Street. There was a plan to extend the Halsted Street car line far below its present terminus. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, which ran near there, would be glad to put a passenger station on the property. The initial cost of the land would be $40,000, which they would share equally. Grading, paving, lighting, Tree planting, surveying would cost roughly an additional $25,000. There would be expenses for advertising, say 10% of the total investment for 2 years, or perhaps 3. A total of $19,500 or $20,000. All told, they would stand to invest jointly the sum of $95,000 or possibly $100,000, of which Lester's share would be $50,000. Then Mr. Ross began to figure on the profits. The character of the land, its saleability, and the likelihood of a rise in value could be judged by the property adjacent, the sales that had been made north of 55th Street and east of Halsted. Take, for instance, the Mortimer plot at Halsted and 55th Streets on the southeast corner. Here was a piece of land that in 1882 was held at $45 an acre. In 1886, it had risen to $5,000 an acre, as attested by its sale to a Mr. John L. Slauson at that time. In 1889, 3 years later, it had been sold to Mr. Mortimer for $1,000 per acre, precisely the figure at which this tract was now offered. It could be parceled out into lots 50 by 100 feet at $500 per lot. Was there any profit in that? Lester admitted that there was. Ross went on, somewhat boastfully, to explain just how real estate profits were made. It was useless for any outsider to rush into the game and imagine that he could do it in a few weeks or years what trained real estate speculators like himself had been working on for a quarter of a century. There was something in prestige, something in taste, something in psychic apprehension. Supposing that they went into the deal, he, Ross, would be the presiding genius. He had a trained staff. He controlled giant contractors. He had friends in the tax office, in the water office, and in various other city departments which made or marred city improvements. If Lester would come in with him, he would make him some money. How much he would not say exactly. $50,000 at the lowest, $150,000 to $200,000 in all likelihood. Would Lester let him go into details and explain just how the scheme could be worked out? After a few days of quiet cogitation, Lester decided to accede Mr. Ross's request. He would look into this thing. Chapter 49. The peculiarity of this particular proposition was that it had the basic elements of success. Mr. Ross had the experience and the judgment which were quite capable of making a success of almost anything he undertook. He was in a field which was entirely familiar. He could convince almost any able man if he could get his ear sufficiently long to lay his facts before him. Lester was not convinced at first, although, generally speaking, he was interested in real estate propositions. He liked land. He considered it a sound investment, providing you did not get too much of it. He had never invested in any, or scarcely any, solely because he had not been in a realm where real estate propositions were talked of. As it was, he was landless and, in a way, jobless. He rather liked Mr. Ross and his way of doing business. It was easy to verify his statements, and he did verify them in several particulars. There were his signs out on the prairie stretches, and here were his ads in the daily papers. It seemed not a bad way at all in his idleness to start and make some money. The trouble with Lester was that he had reached the time where he was not as keen for details as he had formerly been. All his work in recent years, in fact, from the very beginning, had been with large propositions, the purchasing of great quantities of supplies, the placing of large orders, the discussion of things which were wholesale and which had very little to do with the minor details which make up the special interests of the smaller traders of the world. In the factory, his brother Robert had figured the pennies and nickels of labor cost, had seen to it that all the little leaks were shut off. Lester had been left to deal with larger things, and he had consistently done so. When it came to this particular proposition of his interest was in the wholesale phases of it, not the petty details of selling. He could not help seeing that Chicago was a growing city and that land values must rise. What was now far-out prairie property would soon, in the course of a few years, be well built-up suburban residence territory. Scarcely any land that could be purchased now would fall in value. It might drag in sales or increase, but it couldn't fall. Ross convinced him of this. He knew it of his own judgment to be true. The several things on which he did not speculate sufficiently were the life and or health of Mr. Ross, the chance that some obnoxious neighborhood growth would affect the territory he had selected as residence territory, the fact that difficult money situations might reduce real estate values, in fact, bring about a flurry of real estate liquidation which would send prices crashing down and cause the failure of strong promoters, even such promoters, for instance, as Mr. Samuel E. Ross. For several months, he studied the situation as presented by his new guide and mentor, and then, having satisfied himself that he was reasonably safe, decided to sell some of the holdings which were netting him a beggarly 6%, and invest in this new proposition. The first cash outlay was $20,000 for the land, which was taken over under an operative agreement between himself and Ross. This was run indefinitely, so long as there was any of this land left to sell. The next thing was to raise $12,500 for improvements, which he did, and then to furnish some $2,500 more for taxes and unconsidered expenses, items which had come up in carrying out the improvement work which had been planned. It seemed that hard and soft earth made a difference in grading costs, that trees would not always flourish as expected, that certain members of the city water and gas departments had to be seen and fixed before certain other improvements could be effected. Mr. Ross attended to all this, but the cost of the proceedings was something which had to be discussed, and Lester heard it all. After the land was put in shape, about a year after the original conversation, it was necessary to wait until spring for the proper advertising and booming of the new section. And this advertising began to call at once for the third payment. Lester disposed of an additional $15,000 worth of securities in order to follow this venture to its logical and profitable conclusion. Up to this time, he was rather pleased with his venture. Ross had certainly been thorough and businesslike in his handling of the various details. The land was put in excellent shape. It was given a rather attractive title, Inwood, although, as Lester noted, there was precious little wood anywhere around there. But Ross assured him that people looking for a suburban residence would be attracted by the name, seeing the vigorous efforts in tree planting that had been made to provide for shade in the future. They would take the will for the deed. Lester smiled. The first chill wind that blew upon the infant project came in the form of a rumor that the International Packing Company, one of the big constituent members of the packing house combination at Halsted and 39th Streets, had determined to desert the old group and lay out a new packing area for itself. The papers explained that the company intended to go farther south, probably below 55th Street and west of Ashland Avenue. This was the territory that was located due west of Lester's property, and the mere suspicion that the packing company might invade the territory was sufficient to blight the prospects of any budding real estate deal. Ross was beside himself with rage. He decided after quick deliberation that the best thing to do would be to boom the property heavily, by means of newspaper advertising and see if it could not be disposed of before any additional damage was likely to be done of it. He laid the matter before Lester, who agreed that this would be advisable. They had already expended $6,000 in advertising, and now the additional sum of $3,000 was spent in 10 days to make it appear that Inwood was an ideal residence section, equipped with every modern convenience for the home lover, and destined to be one of the most exclusive and beautiful suburbs of the city. It was a no-go. A few lots were sold, but the rumor that the International Packing Company might come was persistent and deadly. From any point of view, save that of a foreign population neighborhood, the enterprise was a failure. To say that Lester was greatly disheartened by this blow is to put it mildly. Practically $50,000, two-thirds of all his earthly possessions, outside of his stipulated annual income was tied up here. And there were taxes to pay, repairs to maintain, actual depreciation and value to face. He suggested to Ross that the area might be sold at its cost value, or a loan raised on it, and the whole enterprise abandoned. But that experienced real estate dealer was not so sanguine. He had had one or two failures of this kind before. He was superstitious about anything which did not go smoothly from the beginning. If it didn't go, it was a hoodoo, a black shadow, and he wanted no more to do with it. Other real estate men, as he knew to his cost, were of the same opinion. Some 3 years later, the property was sold under the sheriff's hammer. Lester, having put in $50,000 all told, recovered a trifle more than $18,000, and some of his wise friends assured him that he was lucky in getting off so easily. Chapter 50. While the real estate deal was in progress, Mrs. Gerald decided to move to Chicago. She had been staying in Cincinnati for a few months and had learned a great deal as to the real facts of Lester's irregular mode of life. The question whether or not he was really married to Jennie remained an open one. The garbled details of Jennie's early years, the fact that a Chicago paper had written him up as a young millionaire who was sacrificing his fortune for love of her, the certainty that Robert had practically eliminated him from any voice in the King Company, all came to her ears. She hated to think that Lester was making such a sacrifice of himself. He had let nearly a year slip by without doing anything. In 2 more years, his chance would be gone. He had said to her in London that he was without many illusions. Was Jennie one? Did he really love her, or was he just sorry for her? Letty wanted very much to find out for sure. The house that Mrs. Gerald leased in Chicago was a most imposing one on Drexel Boulevard. "I'm going to take a house in your town this winter, and I hope to see a lot of you," she wrote to Lester. "I'm awfully bored with life here in Cincinnati. After Europe, it's so... well, you know. I saw Mrs. Knowles on Saturday. She asked after you. You ought to know that you have a loving friend in her. Her daughter is going to marry Jimmy Severance in the spring." Lester thought of her coming with mingled feelings of pleasure and uncertainty. She would be entertaining largely, of course. Would she foolishly begin by attempting to invite him and Jennie? Surely not. She must know the truth by this time. Her letter indicated as much. She spoke of seeing a lot of him. That meant that Jennie would have to be eliminated. He would have to make a clean breast of the whole affair to Letty. Then she could do as she pleased about their future intimacy. Seated in Letty's comfortable boudoir one afternoon, facing a vision of loveliness in pale yellow, he decided that he might as well have it out with her. She would understand. Just at this time, he was beginning to doubt the outcome of the real estate deal, and consequently, he was feeling a little blue, and, as concomitant, a little confidential. He could not as yet talk to Jennie about his troubles. "You know, Lester," said Letty, by way of helping him to his confession. The maid had brought tea for her and some brandy and soda for him, and departed. That I have been hearing a lot of things about you since I've been back in this country. Aren't you going to tell me all about yourself? You know I have your real interests at heart." "What have you been hearing, Letty?" he asked quietly. "Oh, about your father's will, for one thing, and the fact that you're out of the company. And some gossip about Mrs. Kane, which doesn't interest me very much. You know what I mean. Aren't you going to straighten things out so that you can have what rightfully belongs to you? It seems to me such a great sacrifice, Lester. Unless, of course, you are very much in love." "Are you?" she asked archly. Lester paused and deliberated before replying. "I really don't know how to answer that question, Letty," he said. "Sometimes I think that I love her. Sometimes I wonder whether I do or not. I'm going to be perfectly frank with you. I was never in such a curious position in my life before. You like me so much, and I don't say what I think of you," he smiled. "But anyhow, I can talk to you frankly. I'm not married." "I thought as much," she said as he paused. "And I'm not married because I have never been able to make up my mind just what to do about it. When I first met Jennie, I thought her the most entrancing girl I had ever laid eyes on." "That speaks volumes for my charms at that time," interrupted his vis-a-vis. "Don't interrupt me if you want to hear this," he smiled. "Tell me one thing," she questioned, "and then I won't. Was that in Cleveland?" "Yes." "So I heard," she assented. "There was something about her, so—" "Love at first sight," again interpolated Letty foolishly. Her heart was hurting her. "I know. Are you going to let me tell this?" "Pardon me, Lester, I can't help a twinge or two." "Well, anyhow, I lost my head. I thought she was the most perfect thing under the sun, even if she was a little out of my world. This is a democratic country. I thought that I could just take her, and then, well, you know, that is where I made my mistake. I didn't think that would prove as serious as it did. I never cared for any other woman but you before, and I'll be frank, I didn't know whether I wanted to marry you. I thought I didn't want to marry any woman. I said to myself that I could just take Jennie, and then, after a while, when things had quieted down some, we could separate. She would be well provided for. I wouldn't care very much. She wouldn't care. You understand." "Yes, I understand," replied his confessor. "Well, you see, Letty, it hasn't worked out that way. She's a woman of a curious temperament. She possesses a world of feeling and emotion. She's not educated in the sense in which we understand that word, but she has natural refinement and tact. She's a good housekeeper. She's an ideal mother. She's the most affectionate creature under the sun. Her devotion to her mother and father was beyond words. Her love for her daughter, she's hers, not mine, is perfect. She hasn't any of the graces of the smart society woman. She isn't quick at repartee. She can't join in any rapid-fire conversation. She thinks rather slowly, I imagine. Some of her big thoughts never come to the surface at all, but you can feel that she is thinking and that she is feeling. You pay her a lovely tribute, Lester, said Letty. I ought to, he replied. She's a good woman, Letty. But for all that I have said, I sometimes think that it's only sympathy that's holding me. Don't be too sure, she said warningly. Yes, but I've gone through with a great deal. The thing for me to have done was to have married her in the first place. There have been so many entanglements and so much rowing and discussion that I've rather lost my bearings. This will of father's complicates matters. I stand to lose 800,000 if I marry her. Really, a great deal more, now that the company has been organized into a trust. I might better say 2 millions. If I don't marry her, I lose everything outright in about 2 more years. Of course, I might pretend that I have separated from her, but I don't care to lie. I can't work it out that way without hurting her feelings. And she's been the soul of devotion. Right down in my heart, at this minute, I don't know whether I want to give her up. Honestly, I don't know what the devil to do. Lester looked, lit a cigar in a far-off speculative fashion, and looked out of the window. Was there ever such a problem? Questioned Letty, staring at the floor. She rose after a few moments of silence and put her hands on his round, solid head. Her yellow silken house gown, faintly scented, touched his shoulders. Poor Lester, she said. You certainly have tied yourself up in a knot. But it's a Gordian knot, my dear, and it will have to be cut. Why don't you discuss this whole thing with her, just as you have with me, and see how she feels about it? It seems such an unkind thing to do, he replied. You must take some action, Lester dear, she insisted. You can't just drift. You are doing yourself such a great injustice. Frankly, I can't advise you to marry her. And I'm not speaking for myself in that, though I'll take you gladly, even if you did forsake me in the first place. I'll be perfectly honest. Whether you ever come to me or not, I love you, and always shall love you. I know it, said Lester, getting up. He took her hands in his and studied her face curiously. Then he turned away. Letty paused to get her breath. His action discomposed her. But you're too big a man, Lester, to settle down on 10,000 a year, she continued. You're too much of a social figure to drift. You ought to get back into the social and financial world where you belong. All that's happened won't injure you if you reclaim your interest in the company. You can dictate your own terms. And if you tell her the truth, she won't object, I'm sure. If she cares for you as you think she does, she will be glad to make the sacrifice. I'm positive of that. You can provide for her handsomely, of course. It isn't the money Jennie wants, said Lester gloomily. Well, even if it isn't, she can live without you, and she can live better for having an ample income. She will never want if I can help it, he said solemnly. You must leave her, she urged, with a new touch of decisiveness. You must. Every day is precious with you, Lester. Why don't you make up your mind to act at once? Today, for that matter. Why not? Not so fast, he protested. This is a ticklish business. To tell you the truth, I hate to do it. It seems so brutal, so unfair. I'm not one to run around and discuss my affairs with other people. I've refused to talk about this to anyone heretofore. My father, my mother, anyone. But somehow you have always seemed closer to me than anyone else, and since I met you this time, I have felt as though I ought to explain. I've really wanted to. I care for you. I don't know whether you understand how that can be under the circumstances, but I do. You're nearer to me intellectually and emotionally than I thought you were. Don't frown. You want the truth, don't you? Well, there you have it. Now explain me to myself, if you can. I don't want to argue with you, Lester, she said softly, laying her hand on his arm. I merely want to love you. I understand quite well how it has all come about. I'm sorry for myself. I'm sorry for you. I'm sorry, she hesitated, for Mrs. Kane. She's a charming woman. I like her, I really do. But she isn't the woman for you, Lester. She really isn't. You need another type. It seems so unfair for us two to discuss her in this way, but really it isn't. We all have to stand on our merits. And I'm satisfied. If the facts in this case were put before her as you have put them before me, she would see just how it all is and agree. She can't want to harm you. Why, Lester, if I were in her position, I would let you go. I would, truly. I think you know that I would. Any good woman would. It would hurt me, but I'd do it. It will hurt her, but she'll do it. Now, mark you my words, she will. I think I understand her as well as you do. Better. For I am a woman. Oh, she said, pausing. I wish I were in a position to talk to her. I could make her understand. Lester looked at Letty, wondering at her eagerness. She was beautiful, magnetic, immensely worthwhile. Not so fast, he repeated. I want to think about this. I have some time yet. She paused, a little crestfallen but determined. This is the time to act, she repeated, her whole soul in her eyes. She wanted this man, and she was not ashamed to let him see that she wanted him. Well, I'll think of it, he said uneasily, then, rather hastily, he bade her goodbye and went away. Chapter 51. Lester had thought of his predicament earnestly enough, and he would have been satisfied to act soon if it had not been that one of those disrupting influences which sometimes complicate our affairs entered into his Hyde Park domicile. Gerhardt's health began rapidly to fail. Little by little he had been obliged to give up his various duties about the place. Finally, he was obliged to take to his bed. He lay in his room, devotedly attended by Jennie and visited constantly by Vesta, and occasionally by Lester. There was a window not far from his bed which commanded a charming view of the lawn and one of the surrounding streets, and through this he would gaze by the hour, wondering how the world was getting on without him. He suspected that Woods, the coachman, was not looking after the horses and harnesses as well as he should, that the newspaper carrier was getting negligent in his delivery of the papers, that the furnace man was wasting coal or was not giving them enough heat. A score of little petty worries which were nevertheless real enough to him. He knew how a house should be kept. He was always rigid in his performance of his self-appointed duties, and he was so afraid that things would not go right. Jennie made for him a most imposing and sumptuous dressing gown of basted wool, covered with dark blue silk, and bought him a pair of soft, thick wool slippers to match. But he did not wear them often. He preferred to lie in bed, read his Bible and the Lutheran papers, and ask Jennie how things were getting along. "I want you should go down in the basement and see what that feller is doing. He's not giving us any heat," he would complain. "I bet I know what he does. He sits down there and reads, and then he forgets what the fire is doing until it's almost out. The beer is right there where he can take it. You should lock it up. You don't know what kind of man he is. He may be no good." Jennie would protest that the house was fairly comfortable, that the man was a nice, quiet, respectable-looking American, that if he did drink a little beer it would not matter. Gerhardt would immediately become incensed. "That is always the way," he declared vigorously. "You have no sense of economy. You are always so ready to let things go if I am not there. He is a nice man. How do you know he's a nice man? Does he keep the fire up? No. Does he keep the walks clean? If you don't watch him, he will be just like the others. No good. You should go around and see how things are for yourself." "All right, Papa," she would reply in a genial effort to soothe him. "I will. Please don't worry. I'll lock up the beer. Don't you want a cup of coffee now and some toast?" "No," Gerhardt would sigh immediately. "My stomach, it don't do right. I don't know how I'm going to come clean of this. I don't know how I'm going to come out of this." Dr. Macon, the leading physician of the vicinity and a man of considerable experience and ability, called at Jennie's request and suggested a few simple things: hot milk, a wine tonic, rest. But he told Jennie that she must not expect too much. "You know, he is quite well along in years now. He is quite feeble. If he were 20 years younger, we might do a great deal for him. As it is, he is quite well off where he is. He may live for some time. He may get up and be around again, and then he may not. We must all expect these things. I have never any care as to what may happen to me. I am too old myself." Jennie felt sorry to think that her father might die, but she was pleased to think that if he must, it was going to be under such comfortable circumstances. Here at least he could have every care. It soon became evident that this was Gerhardt's last illness, and Jennie thought it her duty to communicate with her brothers and sisters. She wrote Bass that his father was not well, and had a letter from him saying that he was very busy and couldn't come on unless the danger was an immediate one. He went on to say that George was in Rochester working for a wholesale wallpaper house, that Chef Jefferson Company, he thought. Martha and her husband had gone to Boston. Her address was a little suburb named Belmont, just outside the city. William was in Omaha working for a local electric company. Veronica was married to a man named Albert Sheridan, who was connected with a wholesale drug company in Cleveland. "She never comes to see me," complained Bass, "but I'll let her know." Jennie wrote to each one personally. From Veronica and Martha, she received brief replies. They were very sorry, and would she let them know if anything happened? George wrote that he could not think of coming to Chicago unless his father was very ill indeed, but that he would like to be informed from time to time how he was getting along. William, as he told Jennie some time afterward, did not get her letter. The progress of the old German's malady toward final dissolution preyed greatly on Jennie's mind. For in spite of the fact that they had been so far apart in times past, they had now grown very close together. Gerhard had come to realize clearly that his outcast daughter was goodness itself, at least so far as he was concerned. She never quarreled with him, never crossed him in any way. Now that he was sick, she was in and out of his room a dozen times in an evening or an afternoon, seeing whether he was all right, asking how he liked his breakfast, or his lunch, or his dinner. As he grew weaker, she would sit by him and read, or do her sewing in his room. One day, when she was straightening his pillow, he took her hand and kissed it. He was feeling very weak and despondent. She looked up in astonishment, a lump in her throat. There were tears in his eyes. "You're a good girl, Jennie," he said brokenly. "You've been good to me. I've been hard and cross, but I'm an old man. You forgive me, don't you?" "Papa, please don't," she pleaded, tears welling from her eyes. "You know I have nothing to forgive. I'm the one who has been all wrong." "No, no," he said, and she sank down on her knees beside him and cried. He put his thin yellow hand on her hair. There, he said brokenly. "I understand a lot of things I didn't. We get wiser as we get older." She left the room, ostensibly to wash her face and hands, and cried her eyes out. Was he really forgiving her at last? And she had lied to him so. She tried to be more attentive, but that was impossible. But after this reconciliation, he seemed happier and more contented, and they spent a number of happy hours together just talking. Once he said to her, "You know, I feel just like I did when I was a boy. If it wasn't for my bones, I could get up and dance on the grass." Jennie fairly smiled and sobbed in one breath. "You'll get stronger, Papa," she said. "You're going to get well, and I'll take you out driving." She was so glad she had been able to make him comfortable these last few years. As for Lester, he was affectionate and considerate. "Well, how is it tonight?" he would ask the moment he entered the house, and he would always drop in for a few minutes before dinner to see how the old man was getting along. "He looks pretty well," he would tell Jennie. "He's apt to live some time yet. I wouldn't worry." Vesta also spent much time with her grandfather, for she had come to love him dearly. She would bring her books, if it didn't disturb him too much, and recite some of her lessons. Or she would leave his door open and play for him on the piano. Lester had bought her a handsome music box, also, which she would sometimes carry to his room and play for him. At times he worried of everything and everybody save Jennie. He wanted to be alone with her. She would sit beside him quite still and sew. She could see plainly that the end was only a little way off. Gerhard, true to his nature, took into consideration all the various arrangements contingent upon his death. He wished to be buried in the little Lutheran cemetery, which was several miles farther out on the south side, and he wanted the beloved minister of his church to officiate. "I want everything plain," he said. "Just my black suit and those Sunday shoes of mine, and that black string tie. I don't want anything else. I'll be all right." Jennie begged him not to talk of it, but he would. One day, At 4 o'clock, he had a sudden sinking spell. And at 5, he was dead. Jennie held his hands, watching his labored breathing. Once or twice he opened his eyes to smile at her. "I don't mind going," he said, in this final hour. "I've done what I could." "Don't talk of dying, Papa," she pleaded. "It's the end," he said. "You've been good to me. You're a good woman." She heard no other words from his lips. The finish which time thus put to this troubled life affected Jennie deeply. Strong in her kindly emotional relationships, Gerhard had appealed to her not only as her father, but as a friend and counselor. She saw him now in his true perspective, a hard-working, honest, sincere old German who had done his best to raise a troublesome family and lead an honest life. Truly, she had been his one great burden, and she had never really dealt truthfully with him to the end. She wondered now if where he was, he could see that she had lied. And would he forgive her? He had called her a good woman. Telegrams were sent to all the children. Bass wired that he was coming and arrived the next day. The others wired that they could not come, but asked for details, which Jennie wrote. The Lutheran minister was called in to say prayers and fix the time of the burial service. A fat, smug undertaker was commissioned to arrange all the details. Some few neighborhood friends called, those who had remained most faithful. And on the second morning following his death, the services were held. Lester accompanied Jennie and Vesta and Bass to the little red brick Lutheran church and sat stolidly through the rather dry services. He listened warily to the long discourse on the beauties and rewards of a future life and stirred irritably when reference was made to a hell. Bass was rather bored, but considerate. He looked upon his father now much as he would on any other man. Only Jennie wept sympathetically. She saw her father in perspective. The long years of trouble he had had. The days in which he had had to saw wood for a living. The days in which he had lived in a factory loft. The little shabby house they had been compelled to live in 13th Street. The terrible days of suffering they had spent in Laurie Street in Cleveland. His grief over her, his grief over Mrs. Gerhardt, his love and care of Vesta, and finally these last days. Oh, he was a good man, she thought. He meant so well. They sang a hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," and then she sobbed. Lester pulled at her arm. He was moved to the danger line himself by her grief. "You'll have to," Jennie quieted a little, but the fact that the last visible ties were being broken between her and her father were almost too much. At the grave in the cemetery of the Redeemer, where Lester had immediately arranged to purchase a lot, they saw the plain coffin lowered and the earth shoveled in. Lester looked curiously at the bare trees, the brown dead grass, and the brown soil of the prairie turned up at this simple graveside. There was no distinction to this burial plot. It was commonplace and shabby, a working man's resting place, but so long as he wanted it, it was all right. He studied Bass's keen, lean face, wondering what sort of a career he was cutting out for himself. Bass looked to him like someone who would run a cigar store successfully. He watched Jennie wiping her red eyes, and then he said to himself again, "Well, there is something to her." The woman's emotion was so deep, so real. "There's no explaining a good woman," he said to himself. On the way home, through the wind-swept, dusty streets, he talked of life in general, Bass and Vesta being present. "Jennie takes things too seriously," he said. "She's inclined to be morbid. Life isn't as bad as she makes out with her sensitive feelings. We all have our troubles, and we all have to stand them, some more, some less. We can't assume that anyone is so much better or worse off than anyone else. We all have our share of troubles." "I can't help it," said Jennie. "I feel so sorry for some people." "Jennie always was a little gloomy," put in Bass. He was thinking what a fine figure of a man Lester was, how beautifully they lived, how Jennie had come up in the world. He was thinking that there must be a lot more to her than he had originally thought. Life surely did turn out queer. At one time he thought Jennie was a hopeless failure and no good. "You ought to try to steel yourself to take things as they come without going to pieces this way," said Lester finally. Bass thought so too. Jennie stared thoughtfully out of the carriage window. There was the old house now, large and silent without Gerhardt. Just think. She would never see him anymore. They finally turned into the drive and entered the library. Jeanette, nervous and sympathetic, served tea. Jennie went to look after various details. She wondered curiously where she would be when she died.